Welcome to the Frequency Labyrinth. I am Adrienne McDonald, your host. This podcast is for you if you're done with surface level self-help and ready for something deeper and actually transformative. Around here, we work with ancient wisdom, human design, gene keys, and shamanic practices, not as knowledge to collect, but as tools to live by. This isn't about one size fits all. It's about learning to work with your energy, your design, and your life. This is about integration and embodiment. We go deep here with ancient wisdom, practical integration, so that you can develop ironclad self-trust. Let's get into it. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome back to the Frequency Labyrinth podcast. Today we are talking about noise, the noise in your head, and what happens when the noise in your head gets really loud, because it's really loud right now for a lot of people, myself included, as Saturn is sitting on my natal Saturn replacement. You know how it goes. One relatively small thing happens, and sometimes absolutely nothing happens, which actually sometimes is worse. And suddenly your brain has written and produced and directed, I don't know, like a entire series or feature film about what everything means. And it could be someone doesn't respond the way you expected, something that you've been working towards feels off or isn't working out like you thought it would. You're waiting for an answer. Something that felt clear a week ago doesn't feel nearly as clear today. And because we don't have all the information, we start filling in the blanks. Maybe this means this. Maybe they meant that. Maybe I've made the wrong decision. Maybe this isn't working anymore. Maybe I need to change direction. Give it enough time, and one unanswered question can turn into reconsidering half your life sometimes. So, which kind of feels pretty appropriate for where we are right now in the cosmic energy mix, because we are smack dab in the middle of eclipse season. We had the solar eclipse in Leo last week, and now we're moving towards the lunar eclipse in Pisces next week. And I've been calling August molting season because I like that metaphor so much better than the shedding and releasing that's usually associated with eclipses. When a crab molts, as I said, I think last podcast or maybe the one before or both, it's outgrown the shell that used to protect it. It has to come out of that shell, but the new one isn't immediately hardened. There's that in-between period where the crab is soft and vulnerable, and I kind of feel like if crabs were capable of existential crisis, they would probably be wondering what the hell were they thinking. And I feel like that's really the part of the molt that I've been thinking about this week. We love talking about outgrowing things. We love talking about what's next. We're considerably less enthusiastic about the part in between where something doesn't fit the way it used to, or maybe it never did, but you have no idea what the next thing is yet. Sometimes nothing is like obviously wrong. You just know something has shifted. And of course, we want to know what that means. The brain wants to know, where's this going? What am I supposed to do with this? Is this the ending? Is this something that's beginning? Did I screw something up? Is this intuition? Am I overthinking it? Do I need to do something? The mind hates a blank space. So when life doesn't give us an answer quickly enough, we tend to make one up. And I know this particular circus pretty well because I have an open head and open Ajna in my human design chart. So there can be this whole lot of mental pressure floating up there without necessarily having a consistent place to land. An open head can pick up on questions and ideas and problems from everywhere and decide all of them need attention. And an open Ajna can get caught really trying to search for certainty where certainty is not actually available. And I think that, when we have Uranus in Gemini for the next 7 years, I think this is going to become the new norm, where it's not going to be really easy to grab hold of certainty because things are going to be moving so fast. And I don't mean that just technology-wise, although that is a big component of it. But when you have all this together, my head can get really loud. And I've learned that something taking up a ridiculous amount of space in my head doesn't make it necessarily automatically important. Mental volume and relevance are not the same thing. Sometimes I'm chewing on something that actually matters. Sometimes I picked up on somebody else's question or uncertainty and started carrying around like it's mine. And sometimes my brain has simply found a loose thread and decided we are going to pull on it for the next 6 hours, 3 days. One never knows. I got Virgo in the 3rd house. The Ajna piece is especially interesting for me because I really like things to make sense. Again, Virgo, 3rd house. I like connecting dots. I like finding patterns underneath what looks like chaos. And I'm really good at that. That's literally a huge part of the work I do. And I'm really good at that. But the problem is that sometimes there's not enough dots yet. And I find if I'm connecting them anyway, sometimes I'm not finding a pattern, I'm making one up. And that's a very different thing, right? I've learned to, I've had to fine tune my intuition there, but I'm also human, so sometimes I just ignore it, right? So whether you know anything about your human design or you have absolutely no idea whether your head or Ajna is open, I think the question is still useful is what happens in your head when you don't know all the information? Can you leave something unanswered for a while, or does your mind immediately start trying to close the loop? Because astrologically speaking, we're in this week where closing the loop may be a little harder than usual. Mars has moved into Cancer, which is going to probably turn up the emotions a little bit, and it's making a square to Neptune. And Mars wants to do something. It wants movement. It wants direction. It wants somewhere to put its energy. But Mars in Cancer isn't moving through a particularly straightforward line. It's not comfortable in this territory. Mars is in its fall in Cancer. Cancer brings feelings and memory, attachment, protection, family, belonging, all the stuff that we've accumulated around what makes us feel safe. And then when Mars squares Neptune later on this week, Neptune is not exactly known for handing us a laminated checklist or instructions sheet. Things can get pretty fuzzy, and I want to be, a little careful here, because I think that this doesn't mean that you can't trust the data or you can't trust your intuition this week, or that everything that you're sensing is bullshit. Sometimes something really is off. Sometimes you're picking up on a change before you have language for it. Sometimes your body knows something long before your mind catches up. We've talked about that before. But maybe the original signal is, something about this doesn't feel right. Okay, that's information, right? The trouble starts when the mind gets a hold of that sentence. Something doesn't feel right. Therefore, I know exactly what's happening, why it's happening, what this person is thinking, what's going to happen next. And while we're here, let's revisit every questionable decision I've made since 1997 or 98. See how that goes off the rails. Now, if we've wandered pretty far away from the information, yeah, probably, if we're doing that. So that brings me to the human design transit that we're dealing with this week. The sun is moving through gate 29, and that is the gate of perseverance. And the gene keys 29 moves from half-heartedness to commitment to devotion. And I know this one well because gate 29 is my pearl in the Gene Keys prosperity sequence. And I have wrestled deeply with half-heartedness more than once. In fact, right now, as transiting Saturn is sitting right on my natal Saturn placement, I am very much deep into wrestling with half-heartedness on a couple of different things. And when I'm genuinely in for something, I'm very in. I could stick with things for a very long time. One could argue that I stuck with some things a little too long. I can work through the ugly middle. I can power through. I'm also Gen X, so, that helps. I can keep going after the novelty is worn off. But I also know exactly what it feels like to be doing something while part of me has already wandered off and left the building. And that's where half-heartedness gets interesting to me, because I don't think it means all the time that we're lazy or afraid of commitment or need to buckle down and try harder. Sometimes we can use half-heartedness as information. Sometimes I've said yes a little too much. Sometimes I've said yes before I really understood what I was saying yes to. Sometimes something was absolutely right when I started it, and at some point it reached the end of its life cycle and what that experience had for me. And sometimes I'm just bored or frustrated or uncomfortable, and I need to stop looking for an exit and keep going, right? Now, somewhat annoyingly, those can feel pretty similar when you're inside of them, and that's a little frustrating. But I've never found just commit harder to be a particularly useful way of understanding gate 29. So for me, the better question, it goes back to the better question. It's what deserves my whole, the yes with my full chest type of commitment. And this week, that question gets a little bit more interesting because we're still trying to figure out what deserves our commitment while Mars and Neptunes are busy making everything a little foggy. And also, hello, eclipse season, right? So I don't think that... I think that we will probably understand a little bit more where our half-heartedness is living, more than we will where our devotion is pulling us this week, right? We don't only commit to people, jobs, relationships, businesses, or projects. We also commit to explanations. We commit to the idea that something is going wrong. We commit to figuring out what someone else is thinking. We commit to the future we've imagined and start, emotionally living there before anything has actually happened sometimes. We replay conversations. We look for evidence. We think about it in the shower. I think about a lot of things in the shower. We think about it when we're driving. And once we've decided what the story is, the mind is remarkably good about finding evidence that proves it. And that's why it's really helpful to train your mind to be able to move into a neutral space. Because once we've decided what the story is, it's a lot. It can be hard to change it, right? Suddenly everything means something. And I think given the rest of the cosmic mix this week, maybe half-heartedness, commitment, and devotion progression has a different type of application. Maybe it's asking us to pay attention to where we're giving our mental energy to. What stories have we've become devoted to simply because we've repeated them enough times. So I have 3 things I think are worth paying attention to this week when the noise gets loud. Number 1, figure out what you actually know. This is probably the simplest one, although it doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy. Just strip the story down to the boring facts. What do I actually know? Someone hasn't responded to an email. Okay, that's a fact. They're ignoring me is a story. I'm not particularly excited about this thing today. Okay, that's information. I've completely outgrown it and I need to blow up the entire plan is quite a leap from that, though. Something feels different in this relationship. Okay, that's worth noticing, but I know exactly why it's different may be where we start filling in the blanks. There may be absolutely something underneath all of these observations that needs your attention, and there likely is. I'm not suggesting that you ignore the signal. I'm suggesting that don't immediately bury the signal under 15 layers of interpretation, because things are foggy in eclipse season, especially right now. Again, we're between the two. Things may actually be moving around. Something may be changing. You might be standing in a very different place a month from now and look back and realize that this was when you sort of first felt it, but you don't necessarily know what it is yet. So when you catch yourself halfway through, writing the screenplay, come back to, what do I actually know? Who do I suspect? What have I completely made up because I hate not knowing? Okay? Because those are different things. Number 2, stop trying to make the fog give you an answer. Now, this is the one I find most personally annoying because, I just want to freaking know. And sometimes you don't know yet, and that's it. And that's been one of the biggest challenges for me working with my human design and working with my astrological chart and even my shamanic gifts. It's the trust, right? It comes down to trust, Sometimes you just don't know yet. Sometimes, there isn't a hidden spiritual lesson that you're failing to uncover. Sometimes you don't need another oracle card when you've pulled 6 and they're giving you the same information. You don't need to ask 6 more people what they think sometimes. You don't have to journal yourself into oblivion. Sometimes there just simply isn't enough information yet. Or sometimes you've already been given the answer multiple times, you're ignoring it, and that's a different kind of conversation. Mars squaring Neptune can make the not information yet really uncomfortable because Mars wants resolution. Mars wants to do something. And doing something can feel a lot better than admitting that we're sitting in uncertainty. But action and forward movement aren't always the same thing. Sometimes action is just, anxiety wearing a different costume. If you don't have enough information to make a decision, maybe you don't have to make the decision today. If you don't know what something means yet, you don't have to assign meaning to it yet. You can just sit with it. If you can tell that something is shifting, but you can't see what it's becoming, you can just notice that something's shifting, and that's just fine. There's actually a surprising amount of discipline involved in leaving the blank spaces blank for a period of time. And maybe that's one way we work with Gate 29 this week, given the skies. We don't have to say yes to every invitation that our mind sends us. We don't have to commit to every explanation it produces. Sometimes we can just wait for more information. We can ride the wave. And number 3 is notice what gets loud when you feel exposed. And this brings me back to the molt. When the shell comes off, you're exposed. When we feel exposed, all of our favorite protection strategies tend to show up in full force. And maybe yours is overthinking. Maybe you try to start controlling everything. Maybe you withdraw. Maybe you call 5 people and ask what they think. Maybe you immediately make a new plan because a plan would make you feel safer. Maybe you catastrophize so that you can be emotionally prepared for the worst possible outcome. I tend to do this in the overthinking. And, okay, all right, I try to control as well. Like I'm a whole mashup of all these things. Whatever yours is, don't immediately try to get rid of it because that usually doesn't work. Just get curious about it because most of these strategies exist for a reason. At some point, they probably helped. They gave us some sense of safety or control when we didn't have much of either. The more interesting question during a molt is, hey, whether the protection that you're reaching for belongs to the shell that you've already outgrown. When you feel uncertain, what gets louder? What's the first story your brain tells you? What does it immediately tell you need to do? And can you notice that without automatically obeying it? Because once you can separate the original signal from everything that showed up afterward, you got a lot more choice about where your energy goes. Leaning into your intuition, leaning into your human design strategy. And I feel like that's where devotion can come up, right? Devotion doesn't mean certainty. It doesn't mean that you never question yourself or get scared or have days where you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. And it doesn't mean that you figured out that, what eclipse season is changing for you or exactly what you're supposed to do next. Devotion is simply knowing that you're willing to keep coming back to what you're willing to keep coming back to when everything gets noisy. And that is yourself. Self-trust, trust in the universe. It's your practice. It's your own decision-making process. It's the commitment to whatever that process is for you, right? I keep coming back to the crab because the crab doesn't get to skip past the soft part. It can't molt and immediately have a fully hardened shell. There's a period where what protected it is gone and what will protect it isn't ready yet. And I think a lot of us are in that somewhere in that territory right now. We're between the eclipses. Things have moved. More things are probably going to continue to move. Maybe you can feel something happening without having the slightest clue where it's going and what it's going to look like on the other side. And that's going to create some noise. Just don't assume the loudest thing in your head is the truest thing, right? When it gets loud this week, come back to the basics. What do I actually know? What am I actually trying to force an answer to before the answer is available? And what gets loud in me when I feel exposed? We're still in the middle of the molt. You don't have to know what your shell looks like yet, your new one looks like yet. And you definitely don't have to crawl back into the old one just because being soft for a little while feels really weird. Okay? So that's it for this podcast. If you found this helpful, feel free to share it out. As always, I thank you for joining me today. And remember to find beauty every day and seek the magic in the mundane. Thanks for tuning in today. As always, take what resonates, leave the rest. Let whatever landed move through you in whatever way it needs to or wants to. And also, if you want to explore more, you'll find more information in the show notes. If this episode stirred something in you, please share it out or leave a quick review. It helps so much and I really appreciate it. And remember, this work is about integration and it always starts with self-trust.